Great. So for this 401 Using the Human Rights Toolkit training, we encourage you all to participate as much as possible and ask questions. It's a very open session. You can either take yourself off of mute and jump right in, or use the raised hand function or the chat function that you should see on your screen. We also encourage you to share this recording with others or to come back and take a look at it. All of the documents that we're going to share with you today will be on Business Call to Action's website. So you should be able to go back and take a look at all of these and use them within your operations. We're going to do a bit of a brief introduction and then dive right into examining each of the elements of the toolkit. Briefly about myself, I'm a manager in BSR's Human Rights Department, and I've been at BSR for 3 years. Peter Nestor, my colleague, who's also joined as a director on our Human Rights team, and has been at BSR for 7 years. And the two of us work with large multinational companies on how to understand human rights, the human rights impacts of their business, and how to build management systems that address those human rights issues. BSR works globally on the next slide, and we have offices in New York, Europe, and Asia, across Asia. Peter and I are based in our San Francisco office, which is our headquarters, but we have staff across the globe working on a range of corporate responsibility and sustainability issues, including climate, women's empowerment, human rights, and a number of other topics as well. And you can learn more about what BSR does on our website at bsr.org. We'd now like to pass it over to Yvonne to tell us a little bit more about Business Call to Action. Go ahead, Yvonne.
Thank you, Michaela. This is Ivan from Business Call to Action, where I work as Outreach and Membership Lead. Business Call to Action is a membership-based platform for inclusive businesses, hosted by United Nations Development Program and supported by 4 donor partners. We have now 223 member companies operating across the globe in more than 67 countries, across many sectors such as food and agriculture, consumer products, healthcare, financial services, or infrastructure, energy and utilities. And our companies come in all sizes, be they multinational companies, national, or small and medium enterprises, which actually make up 60% of our membership, more than 60%. What all our members share in common is that they pursue inclusive business models, and as such, they jointly committed to provide access to financial services for nearly 60 million people, improve access to healthcare, enhance access to energy, or ensure decent work and economic growth for low-income people. And maybe one of few words on inclusive business model as such. Inclusive business model is defined as a commercially viable business that at the same time engages low-income people in its operations as employees, consumers, producers, or suppliers within the value chain of inclusive businesses. So both aspects are very important: commercial viability, positive social and environmental impact. And it is for this reason that also this Masterclass series is very, very relevant, and that's why Business Call to Action partnered with BSR to host it, because typically inclusive businesses would operate in markets, relatively more difficult markets, where human rights are usually an issue. And at the same time, as has been shown throughout the masterclasses, many human rights are directly linked to sustainable development goals, and they themselves can represent a business opportunity.
Great, thank you so much, Yvonne. At this point, we'll pass it over to Peter to take us through the Human Rights Toolkit.
Okay, very good. Hi, everyone. This is Peter Nestor from BSR. Thanks very much, Michaela, for getting us started, and Yvonne for the overview. Okay, I'm going to be switching through a number of different documents here, a couple of which I've got loaded up into the WebEx platform, and a couple of which I will be sharing my I'll be sharing the application. If you want to follow along online, all of these tools are now available on the Business Call to Action website, and I will put that in the chat window here, but you can find it if you navigate over to the Business Call to Action website. If you go into News and Events, you will find the Masterclass series, Inclusive Business and Human Rights. And then you can scroll down and find the toolkit there too. And if you go all the way to the bottom of the page, you'll see Human Rights and Inclusive Business Toolkit. Let me go ahead and just show you where that is. And also let me just test to make sure this, this works here. Michaela, can you see my screen?
Yep, it's working well.
Good, and hopefully there's not too many blocks on there. So yeah, this is the Masterclass page here on the Business Call to Action site. If you scroll all the way down here, this is where the Business Human Rights Inclusive Toolkit sits. So we're going to go through each of these tools on this call today. All right, let me come back in. The first one is just a guide to what we're going to go through, and let me make sure I bring up the right document here. Okay, good. So this is the Toolkit Overview of what we've got in here, and I'm going to just ask folks to go on mute as people are coming online here, and maybe Michaela, you can manage that. Fantastic. So this is what's in the toolkit. We've got the UN Guiding Principles checklist, which we understand the guiding principles are somewhat high level, somewhat, they kind of ask for a lot of different things that are for companies to do. In some ways, they're very, very simple and straightforward, and in other ways, some of the concepts are really difficult and nuanced. And so we wanted to just provide a very quick checklist that if you are trying to set up a system that is aligned with the guiding principles, that you could quickly say, all right, this is what we really need to do. This is kind of the heart of the matter. So this is really the first tool is just a checklist. The UNGPs lay out the following expectations of business. 3 things: develop a policy, and we'll look through a template that you can copy and use. Conduct some human rights due diligence, where you're assessing actual and potential human rights impacts. So what are the risks that your business might cause a human rights impact? And then are there any negative human rights impacts that are occurring right now? Those would be the actual impacts. So integrate the findings across the company. That is where you are actually, developing some mitigation measures, changing the way the business is done, taking a look at the business process, and ensuring that it aligns with human rights expectations. I'll show you one other tool that we've got on that will get uploaded up to the website very shortly. Track performance. So this is like you're measuring any kind of thing the same way that you would track sales or employee count or other operational things in your business. There are ways you can set up KPIs and management systems to track performance on human rights. Communicate performance, so report on it. And then the third thing, most importantly, provide access to remedy and actually provide remedy where required if there are folks who are harmed. All right, so that's the first tool that just sits right under this guide. Would again just encourage folks to make sure that they are on mute as we're working through stuff here. All right, we'll take a look at the policy tool, the rapid risk assessment, internal and external questionnaires that you can ask both your own employees as you're doing some due diligence, and then that you can send out to external partners, grievance mechanism tool, and then we have a little worksheet on gaining internal buy-in in case you're trying to start a program and get it going at your company. All right, let's take a look at the policy tool here first. And also, feel free to just jump in with questions. I'll stop after each and pause for a minute, but feel free to come online and ask any questions if you'd like. So the policy tool provides a checklist at the top of what we offer as a as a good practice to include in a policy. So first is to proclaim respect for all human rights, define human rights by at a baseline referencing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UDHR. Best practice is to also reference the two conventions here, international conventions on civil and political rights, and the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and then the ILO core conventions. Commit to proactively avoid human rights abuses, complicity, get sign-off from the highest level of the company, be as specific as you can about implementation, emphasize the biggest areas of risk, and just give some indication that you've done some due diligence and that you know what you're talking about, and not necessarily just copying, cutting, and pasting an existing human rights policy, although we've got the template that you should copy, cut, paste, but obviously you want to tailor it to your business. Commit to going beyond respect, especially in areas where you can have a positive impact. Outline the governance of human rights at the company, so who's in charge of overseeing it, even if it's somebody's part-time job or it sits in a particular department, whether that's human resources or legal or government affairs, if you have that department. It's important, again, just to give a sense of how it's managed at the company, and then link out to other relevant policies. A lot of companies are already doing really good work on human rights, but aren't necessarily calling it human rights work. This is a place where you can get some credit for anything that you're already doing. This could be a code of conduct that you might have. It could be a supplier policy, and it could be a number of other things that fit within human rights. So those are important to get in here. Page 2, we've got 2 links here for resources. One from a while ago from the Global Compact, how to develop a human rights policy, and then another resource here, a little bit more recent, on developing a policy and making a policy commitment. Our policy template here follows the checklist, so the commitment at the top. Again, copy, cut, paste a lot of this, insert your company names. How are you, what are the issues that you're looking at under here? What are your key impacts? Let's see, and then we've given some sample impacts there. What's your governance and remediation approach? And then, of course, anything else that you want to add that's relevant for your company. So that one is pretty straightforward, but I'll pause here and just see if there are any questions on a policy. Before I do, though, the Business and Human Rights Resource Center is a great resource to go find examples of companies that have already done this. There are a couple of companies that I would point to, if just to keep in the back of your mind, where if you want some examples of what these look like, you can usually find really good practices from them. It's Unilever and Marks and Spencer. I'll just stop with those two. I think you can pretty much find everything you need with them. They also publish human rights reports, and they talk a lot about all the different documentation and process for developing their programs and policies. All right, any questions on the policy checklist? All right, good. I'm going to switch over and share my application here. Okay, very good. And Michaela, just let me know if you can't see this for any reason. So this is the rapid assessment toolkit tool that we've put together, and this is basically just a risk register as you are identifying potential human rights impacts that you might have, and it also brings in the concepts around risk prioritization from the guiding principles, and then gives some management ideas as well. So this is just the introductory tab here, consistent with our thinking on business impacts on human rights, and something that's really aligned with business call to action and the concept of inclusive businesses. We also do believe that business can have a great positive impact on human rights in many cases, and that those risks or those opportunities actually should be considered alongside any human rights risks that you develop. So we explain that a little bit here in the beginning. Just to give you a quick tour of the assessment. So pretty simple Excel sheet here. We've got themes coming down the left-hand side here. These are generally the areas that for most businesses you will want to look, but you could tailor this, download it and tailor it to your own operating context. But taking a look at risks for employees, risks in the supply chain, risks on the particular product that you're developing, risk for any consumers or other customers that might be using your products, and then just another category here that you can tailor. Column C is to identify the human rights issue. We'll come back and go through this in a little bit more detail. Column D is risk and opportunity in column E. Then we've got our severity ranking, scope, scale, and remediability that come out of guiding principles. Some management considerations, likelihood, attribution, leverage, and then some other considerations that you might want to take into account as you build out this tool. What I want to start with, though, is actually tab 3 here where it says Master List. And this is where you can go and grab a number of human rights risks that are relevant for most businesses. This is not an exhaustive list, so you do want to go back and check against the UDHR and maybe some of the other documentation that's out there. But this is going to get you pretty far down the list. So it's divided into a number of different categories, and here just organized alphabetically. But the idea is we can just start at the top here. Let's just grab child labor, and you can copy it from here, say, yeah, that might be a risk for us. Let's take a look. Let's put that in our supply chain. Let's say that we're just doing this as an agriculture company. So maybe there's some risk. We've got some operations in, let's say, in Laos, for example. And so that's going to be our risk there. What is the risk? The risk for our company is that, we'll say, underage children are working on our supplier's farm. Okay. Is there an opportunity? Yeah, maybe around child labor, we could potentially say if it exists, transition children to schools, something like that. And then we want to do our ranking here. So we've got preloaded drop-down menus. And I do want to warn you, I guess is the right word, that often you're working here in a little bit of a gray area, right? So these are not going to be black and white, yes, no answers. And we are going to have to estimate a little bit here and be comfortable, again, working in some of this ambiguity. So the scope is how many people might be affected by this particular harm. Let's say this is just one supplier down in Laos. It's a relatively small farm, maybe let's say less than 50, there might be less than 50 children working on this farm. Now, we just have large, medium, small, and very small, and that's going to be relative to the size of your business and the operation. So let's say that we have farms all over Southeast Asia. This is just one farm that we're working on. I'm going to say that this is actually small here. So that's going to give us a yellow color there, which just says, okay, maybe not quite as much of a risk as others. If it was large, it's going to turn to red. Scale. How serious would the impacts be for the victim? This is basically, you can think about, is this are they going to lose life or limb? Is this a bodily integrity problem, or is this more of like a civil rights problem, right, where they are not able to join a union, for example, and that's something that could easily be remedied. Here, if we have underage workers, kids working in the farm, that's going to be pretty serious. So I'm going to mark this one as major. Remediability. Will a remedy restore the victim to the same or equivalent position before the harm? So this is basically putting the victim back in the position, if you think before the harm occurred, is there even a possibility that they can be remedied? So if they're going to lose a limb, for example, in a manufacturing accident, right, that's going to be really, really hard to restore. So we're going to say, you would say in that case then that it's not possible, and that would give you a darker color there. But if it's likely that you can restore, then that's probably it's going to be a little bit lighter, and so it doesn't necessarily rise to the top. What we would say here, I think we're going to say likely for this particular example, because you could go in and say, all right, we're going to try to start transitioning these children off the farm into school. So we would be able to remedy that one. Likelihood, very likely, likely, possible, unlikely, or very unlikely. I'm going to say this is very likely. We know that there's child labor in Laos, and just from desktop research, we may have poked around and said, all right, is anybody, does this happen down there? So yeah, we're pretty certain. How connected is the company to this? So what's the attribution level here? Is the company causing it, contributing to the child labor, or is it linked to the child labor, just given where it sits in the value chain? With this one, we're going to say this is a supplier in Laos, and so I'm going to say that this one is that we're contributing to it. This is a supplier where it's a key supplier for us, and we're not necessarily causing it, right? We're not saying, okay, you have to go find underage workers and put them in the field, but I'm going to say we're a little bit more than linked, just because it's a really important supplier and they are doing something for us that we can't get anywhere else. So we do have to keep working with them, and so we've got a little bit more leverage, which actually moves us over into column K, which is the leverage. How much leverage do we have? Is this a key supplier? Do they do something unique for us? Or is it someone who we could easily replace? I'm going to say here we have high leverage, and then we can talk a little bit about kind of what we're doing. We don't have to go through all of this example. I want to make sure we have time for some of the others. But I want to talk about these categories. What are the existing mitigation measures? Let's say that we already have we have a policy in place on no child labor. We've done a webinar with BSR, and we've asked our suppliers to do that, but we have not done any on-the-ground training. We haven't gotten out into the field to support them. Propose new mitigation measures. Engage directly with the farmers. Consider root causes, right, of what's going on in this particular community. Why are kids working there? Consider partnerships, and let's say ongoing monitoring. Great. Rights holder engagement. Who do we want to talk to that's on the ground, right? If we get out into the ground, we definitely want to talk to parents, other farmers, and with children, it's really tricky. You got to be very careful about whether or not you want to engage with children directly. Always very important to go to their parents first and other supervisors and make sure that they would be comfortable engaging. But it is useful sometimes if you can hear directly from them about what's going on and what they might be able to do instead of working in the field. So we'll just say maybe engage with children. Are there any time impacts? Is this going to get any worse or better over time? Not necessarily. I don't think for this one. It's a pretty well-known static issue. But maybe it could get worse if we don't do anything about it. And then are there any other notes? So what this allows you to do is you'll get different colors that pop up here, and you'll start to get a sense of, to go back to the severity ranking, how big is the issue, how serious is the problem, and is it remediable? This one's probably going to rise, pretty high to the top of the list because the scale is major. You've got one red block in there, and also with this likely remediability, that means that you actually can do something about it. So, that's one that we would advise that rises to the top. So that is a quick tour of kind of how you use the tool. Again, just copy over these all these issues here, and that should get you pretty far in terms of trying to identify which ones are going to be the most important. All right, let me pause there and see if there are any questions on this tool.
Peter, there's a question that came in through the chat function asking, once the tool is filled out, how are most people then sharing the information internally?
Great question. Great question. So there's a couple different ways that you can do that. I am going to share another tool just as long as we are on this question. So most companies will transition this into some kind of a presentation, usually a PowerPoint presentation, which is a little bit more digestible than a big Excel toolkit. let me share another document here. This is a sample, and we will get this uploaded. We're just decided to put this in yesterday. This is a sample PowerPoint that you can use. Let me get this up here. There we go. A sample PowerPoint that you can use just to show how you transition those risks into an actual strategy, right? Can everyone see this? Okay, Michaela, let me know if you cannot see my screen. You know, again, feel free to download and steal this stuff just in terms of the templates. So, you know, usually you're doing some key takeaways, some analysis on, all right, what are the key issues that we've got? You might want to line it up to the particular issues of of the company. In this case, you'll see on the right-hand part of the slide, we've also linked this to the SDGs, which is really important. We use a chart like this to lay out the different issues. We use 3 categories: primary, secondary, and tertiary issues that are based on the scope, scale, and remediability rankings, with some of the other management factors in there as well. You could use this. It doesn't have to be this complicated, but it can be helpful sometimes to try to move that into a visual representation. Usually a summary like this. So what is the risk? What's the description? What's the priority of that risk? And then in this particular case, what are the opportunities that were identified as well? So just a very short description of that. This is then a strategy overview, right, where you can then roll it up and start to put some activities and KPIs that you want to do on it. This is the framework that we use. So in this case, what is the vision for this particular company on these issues? What are the 3, or not 3? What are in this case the 5 focus areas that they wanted to work on? So in this case, this is a technology company basically. So content, partnerships, tech issues, and then employee issues. These were the key human rights issues that came up under each of those areas. And then we've got goals and KPIs, different programs that they're going to run. How are they going to do this from a governance standpoint? So program management, and then governance and accountability. So then if you keep going through here, it sort of breaks out each of those things. A couple slides here on just moving from strategy into implementation, right? So how do you actually do this? I want to come down and show you this, which is one of our, which is basically a template for an implementation slide, where you can track a lot of different things on here, right? So starting at the top left, we've got this is the primary content topic. So this is content development for this particular company. It sits under their content theme. Their goal is to ensure that content developed and published by this company meets the human right to quality in this particular sector. The ambition level is green over here on the right. They identify the key benefits. Who are the topic owners in this company? What are the potential KPIs which could drive, which they could drive toward to meet this area? And then on the bottom, we've got short-term action. So what are they going to do in 2018 and 19? We've got 3 things here that they can do: start training folks internally on this, start tracking the incidents, developing and piloting feedback processes. And then we've got some longer-term actions that they could take as well, right? So in this case, adding bias and sensitivity filters to their content development, developing and implementing automated AI-based methods in this particular case. So some of that they may be able to get started on now, but some of it they might not be able to. So we basically developed those issue areas for all the key issues that come up. So yeah, again, we'll get this uploaded on there just so you have this tool as well. But I hope that answered your question and gave us an opportunity to talk about one more tool, just to show, all right, how do you actually transition this out, and what do you do with it? All right, the third tool here is, I believe, sorry, one sec, I'm going to have to share my screen here. The third tool is internal and external questions that you can ask. Let's see here. Yep, there we go. All right, so this is basically an interview guide, which will get you started down the path of trying to figure out what you need to ask when you're doing your due diligence. The way we do them at BSR, we usually ask internal employees issues about, what are the areas of operation that you're working on, and in the back of our mind, thinking about potential human rights that might be implicated there. So if we, take our child labor example, we would want to talk to the procurement team who's responsible for overseeing that farm or that particular supplier. Ask them how well they know them, what kind of communication they have, and then trying to get a sense of whether or not this is a risk that's coming up or that is already known and already well managed. So we've got this divided into general questions for internal employees. Again, feel free to copy, cut, paste these as you work through it. Issue-specific questions. So if you're talking to human resources, there are a lot of human rights issues that employees are dealing with. Think specifically around wages, working conditions, harassment in the workplace, right to join a union, right to collective bargaining, right? So those are going to be a lot of issues, discrimination issues. These are some supply chain questions you can ask and direct toward your supply chain team. If there's any customer-facing issues, this is a big area for technology companies in particular, where they might be selling technology that can be used for bad purposes, or they might be selling to customers who are going to modify that technology to use it for bad purposes. So you want to get a sense of who you are doing business with and whether or not you can conduct some due diligence on them. It's also a big risk and concern for companies in the financial services sector who are lending money or, again, doing business with potentially nefarious business partners. This is a self-assessment questionnaire for suppliers template that you can, again, copy, modify, and send out. And we're just ticking off here a number of different things that we'd like to see or that we would want to see from a self-assessment questionnaire of a supplier, right? So what's your employee count? Are there migrant workers that you've got? Do you have a human rights policy? Do you have any other code of conduct or labor policy? You can usually get a sense of whether or not the supplier is, understands these issues and is managing them if they have some of those policies in place. Have they undertaken any due diligence? Do they have a sense of what some priority issues might be? Do they have any management systems? And then, again, do they have any policies that cover these specific areas? What you can do then when you get these back from your business partners is start the process of kind of ranking them and seeing, is this a risky supplier or not? Or is it someone that we're going to have to investigate anyway, right? If we are operating a farm in Laos and we know, or we're doing business with somebody who's doing that, we know that there's potential child labor in Laos. And we want to, regardless of what they say on the self-assessment questionnaire, we know that's going to rise to the top. So I would caution only to not take the self-assessment questionnaires as the complete final word on exactly what suppliers are doing. They might not understand the issues, or they might be really concerned about losing your business and not want to be honest about it. So it's really important to create a space where you can try to talk to them directly about how they are managing these issues. All right, good. Let me just pause there and see if there are any questions. Okay, good. We've got a few more tools to get through. I am going to once again switch back and share the application here. This is our grievance mechanism analysis. So one of the important parts of the guiding principles is to assess whether your grievance mechanism is effective or not. And there are 8 different what are called effectiveness criteria in the guiding principles. We put those right at the top here. They are accessibility. So is the grievance mechanism designed to be accessible to target users? And in practice, is it actually accessible? Is it predictable? And this is one that I think is one of the absolute most important of the effectiveness criteria, is to try to make sure that people know what happens when they call the grievance mechanism, or know what happens when they press send on an email, or know what happens when they go and talk to their human resources person. If they don't, then that will often not encourage them to use the grievance mechanism and then any potential risk or impact will go unreported. So that is a really important one. Rights compatible is, does the grievance mechanism accord with human rights, right? So does the outcome and the process, does it respect human rights? So, is privacy respected during the process, and the confidentiality of the person, is that at least offered? Safety and security of a person using the grievance mechanism, if you're working in more of a high-risk region, all the way through to the particular remedy. The one example that comes to mind here is some work that we were doing at a mining operation in Papua New Guinea, where they were considering whether or not to provide cash remedies to particular victims in that community. And it was a potential risk, actually, if someone was walking through the community after picking up a large amount of cash, that their safety would be in jeopardy. They would suddenly have a target on their back, and they could be robbed or harmed because they had a large amount of cash. So that was putting at risk a number of other human rights, right, in that particular example. So that's what it means to think through rights compatibility. Transparent, is there regular communication with the users, and is the confidentiality appropriately balanced with the need to know the identity of the users? Is it legitimate? That's a very difficult thing to measure and to try to say yes or no. It isn't. But there are a lot of indicators around legitimacy, and we've got some of those in our tool here, that if you start to answer yes to a lot of those, then you can start to claim, yeah, this is a legitimate grievance mechanism. Is it equitable? So is information shared with the aggrieved party? Do they have access to information so that they can make a fair claim? Is it a source of continuous learning? So are there feedback loops that are designed in the system so that if there's complaints that come in over the same issue over a period of time, then the company can say, wait a second, maybe we got to change something more significant about just responding to each claim. And then are rights holders engaged in the design of the process? That's a really important one. I think, again, one where you can get a better grievance mechanism if you talk to the people who are going to have to use it and ask them, hey, does this work for you? Is this the way that you like to communicate in the way that in your culture or community or workplace? Is this the way that you like to raise concerns? The idea in the guiding principles is that those 8 effectiveness criteria are applied throughout the grievance process. What we have done in our tool here is to break the process up into 3 different phases. So that's what we've got in column B here, is the complaint submission phase. So when the person actually comes forward with the complaint. The second is the complaint assessment phase. So what the company does with that complaint once they receive it. And then the last phase is complaint resolution. And so how does the company work with the person to come up with some kind of a solution? And is the remedy that's offered and provided, does that satisfy the person who was aggrieved? We've included a few different indicators in here, pulling what we felt like are the most relevant of the effectiveness criteria. So just using this top example here, for complaint submission, actually I'm going to go to the second example. For complaint submission, accessibility is really important, right? So the complaint mechanism is known and understood by the intended users. It's a little small here. Known and understood by the intended users, and the barriers to access are identified and removed. For example, language, literacy, gender, technological barriers, if there are any. This is going to be an internal consideration. So as the company is designing the grievance mechanism, you want to keep in mind these principles around accessibility. And then there's the key question: has there been an assessment of whether or not workers or community members or others are aware of the grievance mechanism? In this section, then you can fill out what the answer is. So there might be a couple different grievance processes. You might have a hotline. You might do some community engagement. You might have an email website. You might have a suggestion box that somebody could walk by. So you can add each of those in columns F, G. If you need to add more of those, you can just copy those and create a new column. And so then here we would say, yeah, there's been an assessment. We know that it is accessible. And so the gap then is going to be, let's see, full. So that is fully complied, right? We have done the We've done the assessment there. So basically, you just kind of work through this tool, and you're thinking about all of the different ways that you're both building the system and the ways that it is externally or internally facing to the company. So this gets a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit more detailed, and one that we have just refined. So would welcome any feedback on it if you get a chance to play around with this one. Okay, good. Any questions on the grievance mechanism analysis?
I have a quick question on the last column that you were displaying on the gap assessment.
Yeah.
So the score where it says none means, does that mean no system currently addressing? Okay.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The language here, sometimes change, right? Because it could mean no gap, which would be full. But what we're saying here is how many systems are in place. So none is there's nothing that we're doing on that. A little bit is an orange. If we're doing some, then we get yellow, and then if we're fully compliant, we get green.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, right. Very good. Okay, a few more that I want to walk through here. The next one is, just one more. The gaining buy-in tool. So this one will come back into the webinar function here. So this is a tool that Michaela actually has been working on for a little while, and is a worksheet for practitioners inside companies to use to try to think about the different arguments and the different people that they might need to get on board in order to get buy-in to start managing human rights. So let me go through a couple of these categories here. This is intended to be kind of a behind-the-scenes strategy tool that you can use. So identify what you're seeking. What exactly do you want to do here? What is your goal, right? A sample goal might be we want to adopt a human rights policy and conduct a human rights impact assessment and set up systems and processes to make sure that we are actively managing and mitigating our human rights risks. Target audience might be the C-suite, right, or the board of directors. We have to convince them to give us some budget so that we can do that, or to hire a new person so that we can do that, because no one has time to take on all this stuff, even though human rights is super important. We should always make time for human rights. Everybody is busy, and so let's say that that's who we need to convince, right? We're trying to get in and get some budget or a new hire to do this. Recognizing the value proposition. So what's the rationale, right? What are the goals? What are the drivers, and what are the reasons that you are doing this? Some drivers we've listed here, and the idea is you can sort of see what the driver is, and then does this apply to your particular company? And if you don't know if it applies to your particular company, where could you get some more information on it? So legal drivers, are there any regulatory or legal risks to the business? Is this something that you could fit under a broad human rights law like the UK Modern Slavery Act, or the conflict minerals legislation, both in the U.S. and in Europe and in other emerging markets? Are there other regulatory regimes, maybe environmental regimes, that you could fit some of those arguments under? Are there operational risks that you could say, yeah, look, we really got to get a handle on this, because if we don't, we're going to have a community out there protesting, and we're going to have to shut down our operations? Are there reputational risks that you could identify? Is there political pressure that's coming from either home or host governments and countries where you're operating? Is there pressure from investors, from the socially responsible investor community or others? There are good rankings out there right now. I think we talked at one of our webinars about the Corporate Human Rights Benchmark, CHRB ranking. They will be releasing their second ranking this year. They've ranked 100 companies on human rights performance. That can be a really good reason to get stuff going inside the company. Is there customer pressure or user pressure? Do you feel like your customers want to see that you are managing these risks, that you've been able to identify them? And so it's really going to affect the bottom line and your ability to do sales. What are your peers doing on this? Will human rights managing human rights advance your brand? We took a look at a lot of examples from the Business Call to Action platform of companies who are leading with things like respect for human rights and building that into the core part of their business. So that can be a good business driver. Other stakeholder pressure, entering new markets, external trends that you could latch onto, opportunity to innovate. Is this a way that you can lead, or are there new product lines that you could develop, and then other opportunities that you might be able to think of here to advance human rights. So just kind of a worksheet to fill out and give you some ideas to think about reasons to lead with as you're trying to build this. Another one that we've heard from working with companies is that it's very important to align with company goals. The company will often set a strategy for, to 2020, 2025, 2030, and they'll articulate it in business terms, but are there opportunities to link human rights into already articulated goals? That can be very important and a good way to embed it within the business. Finding internal and external examples of existing programs that have already worked. So who else has been successful in your company trying to get something going? How can you emulate that success? So, what's an example program? Maybe the Human Resources Department was able to get a new workplace harassment training in light of the Me Too movement over the last year. And, they were able to kind of make that argument given everything that had been happening externally. So here you would, list that program. What are the drivers behind that program that made it successful? And then is there anything that you could apply to your human rights program to try to get something going there, or a lesson that you could take from that? Thinking through the budget, right? How much are you going to need here? What resources do you need to conduct a human rights assessment, even using the rapid assessment tool there? Do you have a sense of how much it costs? And if you don't, can you call somebody and say, hey, what did you guys do on this? Who did you call, or how many people did you hire, or how long did it take, and what did you end up doing? And then are there ways that it could actually save the company money if you think about legal risks or operational risks or reputational risks, to help justify asking for some of that budget? And then if unknown, where could you find more information? Again, there's a lot of free resources out there. I would start with the Business and Human Rights Resource Center if you want to just get a sense of what's going on in the business and human rights community, try to get a sense of what the issues are. But there are also ways to connect with others, either through Business Call to Action or through BSR. Feel free to email or give us a call afterwards. We can help you talk through some of these things from our own experience. And then assembling your team. So who can help support you? Are there any colleagues that would be particularly helpful? Are there any contributors, allies, advocates that you can identify who would help you get this going? And how are you going to engage them, and what are you going to do, to get them on board? Are there any key external stakeholders that you need to call, or what role could they play? How could they be involved? Sometimes external groups can be really, really helpful to provide a different viewpoint, or to identify different issues or drivers that you might not be thinking of. All right. Oh, sorry. I'm going to ask Karen. I'll just ask you to go on mute there. As we're going through here. Thank you. The last one here is identifying the decision makers, right? So who exactly do you need to convince that you should do this? So identify the decision maker here on the left column. Are they an ally or an opponent? Kind of an aggressive way to put it, but basically, is it someone whose mind you're going to have to change, or do you feel like they already are on board? And what do you already know about why they might support this, or what their opposition is to it? And just lay that out so that you can start to tailor the arguments that you make to folks based on what they already know. So then finally, strategically plan your proposition. What arguments can you make to convince the key decision makers? And here's a few different sort of all rolled up into a checkbox approach, right? Are you going to take the different drivers and reasons and external stakeholders and other considerations and tell more of the human story? Is this going to be a cost savings approach? Is it reputational risk? Is there a legal argument? Is it operational stability? So just trying to think through, all right, what could I lead with here that is going to get the most completed? So this is just a chart that helps lay that out. Who is the decision maker? What's the best type of argument? And then what is the potential counter argument that they might make, so that you can anticipate some pushback coming from them and try to overcome that. and then pull it all together, finalizing your business case, pulling in the details from your research here, and just some open-ended questions where you can lay out and say, yeah, all right, this is exactly what we're doing. This is our rationale for doing it. This is why it's good for our business. This is what others are doing on it. This is how we've done it before. This is how much it's going to cost. And this is what the outcome is going to be. All right, so that is our gaining buy-in tool, and that is going to close our toolkit presentation. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm happy to take any questions, or if you're working on something specifically and want to ask a question about your own business, and you know how this might work for you, happy to take those questions too. So I will just go on pause over here and let anybody come into the conversation. Feel free to raise your hand or come off mute.
Peter, there was one question that came in about grievance mechanisms through the chat function. They ask, is there any guidance on how a business's grievance mechanism can interact with the supplier's own mechanism or any multi-stakeholder initiatives?
Wow, that is a really good question. I mean, so my understanding there is that that's kind of right at the cutting edge of developing grievance mechanisms. There are some groups, I'm thinking specifically of a group called AIM Progress, which is primarily in the, I think exclusively for food, beverage, and agriculture companies. And I know that they have experimented with companies, so big buyers. So let's just take Unilever, for example, right, where Unilever is providing a grievance mechanism to, let's say, a palm oil supplier in Indonesia, and is actively managing and watching grievances that come in on that. I don't know if that particular example went through AIM Progress, but I know at some point they were doing some work on trying to figure out how to link up grievance mechanisms, right, between buyers and suppliers. Another area we've seen it is in construction companies. I know of one construction company that built a worker engagement app. So for this is a migrant worker in the Gulf, or a company that was working in the Gulf that had a lot of migrant workers. For every migrant worker that showed up on site, they were, I think in this case, even offered a smartphone if they didn't have one, but an ability to download an app that was basically that working sites app, and they could do everything from push out announcements like, hey, the temperature is going to be really hot today, be sure to drink water. And then they also had a grievance mechanism built into that app where the worker could say, hey, you know, I ran out of water today, or there was no water on the site. What happened? And that would go to both the site manager, I believe it would go to the site manager, and then up to the actual company as well. So they could keep an eye on and monitor, sort of the buyer sitting in the U.S. in this case, and they could monitor the grievances that were coming in through a back-end dashboard. So yeah, these worker engagement tools and on the technology side of all this are really coming along and becoming more sophisticated. And you know, we are seeing some of these at least the big multinational companies are starting to get involved in actively managing and watching those. You got to be careful with it, and it's very important to bring the lawyers along on that journey because there are some legal implications in some jurisdictions around doing that. But the companies that know that they're operating in a high-risk area are starting to be more active about joining up their grievance mechanisms with suppliers. Very good. Anything else from folks either on the call or anything else that's come in through the chat function? All right, very good. Well, that does conclude our Masterclass series. Thanks for those who have joined us for a number of these webinars. Really great to have you on the calls, and thanks for being so interactive on some of the questions. Feel free to reach out at any time to either Michaela or myself. We also have a link here that you can find if you'd like to provide some feedback to us, but we're happy to walk through any of the tools or something on a call if you'd like after this, or if there's any confusion on what to do. But all of these are available on the Business Call to Action website, as are all of the recordings of these webinars. So feel free to use them again and use them in your own businesses if you found them helpful, and spread the word. Yvonne, thank you very much. On behalf of BSR, it's been wonderful working with you and the business call to action on this. Thank you all for joining today. We will close the webinar here and hope to hear from you soon, and best of luck out there. Do good work and keep in touch. All right. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Peter. Bye.
Bye-bye.